Hello and welcome to the webcast of the 22nd Annual William T. Small Jr. Keynote Lecture of the 41st Annual Minority Health Conference. This webcast is presented by the Minority Student Caucus at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Gilling School of Global Public Health. My name is Laura Dugum, and I'm a second-year MPH student earning a concentration in leadership practice. I'm delighted to introduce this year's keynote speaker, Ms. Latasha Brown. Today, we will watch the recording of her morning keynote address, and then Ms. Brown will take questions from viewers. First, I would like to take a moment to share with you the history of the Minority Student Caucus and the Minority Health Conference. The Minority Student Caucus was founded in 1971 to bring concerns of minority students to the attention of the school's administration and to attract and retain more students and faculty of color. Since it was founded, the caucus has supported and encouraged racial equity. Further, the Minority Student Caucus promotes research, policies, and programs aimed at addressing public health issues that affect people of color. In 1977, the Minority Student Caucus coordinated the first Minority Health Conference. Since then, the conference has grown in size, length, and complexity, providing a platform for students, academics, and community practitioners to explore behavioral, structural, political, and environmental issues that contribute to health disparities among diverse populations. All of this in an effort to create equitable health outcomes for all. You can learn more about the caucus by visiting our website at minorityhealth.web.unc.edu. The Minority Health Conference is the largest and longest running student organized health conference in the country. This year, there are over 700 people attending the conference in person and hundreds watching the webcast from around the world. We are proud of the continued success of the conference and want to thank each of you for helping us continue this tradition. This year, we are excited to partner with a number of student, professional, and community health organizations. This year's partner conferences are the UCLA Center for the Study of Racism, Social Justice, and Health, Brown University School of Public Health, and Virginia Department of Health. These partner conferences have organized their own events alongside today's webcast. Please be sure to contact us if you're interested in partnering with our conference in the future. This year, we have over 60 sponsors and supporters of the Minority Health Conference. We would like to thank the many individuals, corporations, foundations, and schools at UNC and departments across campus. Some of our top sponsors this year include the UNC Gilling School of Global Public Health, the North Carolina Area Health Education Centers Program, the UNC Graduate and Professional Student Federation, Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina, UNC Adams School of Dentistry, UNC Healthcare, and Vic and Marion Schoenbach. We encourage you to visit our website at minorityhealth.web.unc.edu, where we acknowledge all of the organizations and individuals that have supported this conference. Thank you again to all of our 2020 Minority Health Conference sponsors. Your support is essential to providing a forum that highlights effective and engaging advocacy efforts in our communities. Gifts of all sizes are both critical and deeply meaningful to the success of the conference. The keynote lecture is named after Dean William T. Small, Jr. Dean Small was a key supporter in establishing the Minority Health Conference and served as the Associate Dean and Senior Advisor for Multicultural Affairs at the UNC School of Public Health. For nearly 3 decades, he assisted, encouraged, inspired, and advocated on behalf of thousands of students at the UNC School of Public Health. The keynote was named in his honor when he retired in 1991. This year's Minority Health Conference theme is Truth to Power, exercising political voice to achieve health equity. Earlier today, we had the privilege of hearing Ms. Latasha Brown's keynote lecture. Ms. Latasha Brown is an award-winning organizer, philanthropic consultant, political strategist, and jazz singer with over 20 years of experience working in the nonprofit and philanthropy sectors on a wide variety of issues related to political empowerment, social justice, economic development, leadership development, wealth creation, and civil rights. She's the co-founder of Black Voters Matter Fund, a power-building, Southern-based civic engagement organization that played an instrumental role in the 2017 Alabama U.S. Senate race. Ms. Brown is principal owner of Truth Speaks Consulting Incorporated, a philanthropy advisory and consulting firm in Atlanta, Georgia. For more than 25 years, she has served as a consultant and advisor for individual donors, government, public foundations, and private donors. Throughout her career, Ms. Brown has distinguished herself as a trusted expert and resource in political strategy, rural development, and special programming for a number of national and regional philanthropies. She is the founding project director of Grantmakers for Southern Progress and a fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. In just a moment, we will view Ms. Brown's keynote address. As you are watching the lecture, you will be able to pose your questions to Ms. Brown live in our studio. You can ask your questions via email at question@unc.edu, via the Facebook and Instagram Q&A post, or via Twitter at #MHCQA. This information is displayed on your screen and will reappear periodically during the broadcast. We will now show Ms. LaTosha Brown's keynote. On behalf of the Minority Student Caucus, the Conference Planning Committee, and the UNC Gillings School of Global Public Health, we thank you for joining us, and we hope that you enjoy this presentation.
Well, the first thing I did right was the day I started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on. Well, the last thing I did wrong, I stayed in the wilderness a day too long. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on. I wanted to start with that because I think that oftentimes we forget it's really the spirit of the movement. It is. That as we talked about what happened 50 years ago, and as we are on the eve of the 55th anniversary of Bloody Sunday and the Selma to Montgomery March, of which I am a native of Selma, I think it's really important that we realize that this work isn't just head work, this is heart work, but most importantly, this is spirit work. And I raise that because oftentimes what gets lost in this process is, as we're talking about health and healthcare, what does that mean? And what does that mean beyond us just looking at the physical body? What does that mean where we're looking at our own humanity? And so in this space today, when I was thinking about what my talk would be about, you know, what came to me is that I wanted to really frame this in a conversation of where do we go from here? And so as I get ready to my talk, I want to show you all a quick video. It's a 2-minute video that I want you all to view. We are in Flint, Michigan. We're so excited to be here. We're at stop number 4. We're going to 9 cities throughout Michigan, but we're at the Flint Development Center. We're having a community forum, and immediately after that, we're doing a debate watch party.
Tonight we have the Black Voters Matter watch party. We're going to watch the Democratic debate, the big one with Joe Biden, Cory Booker, who was here at the Flint Development Center last week.
We are in Flint, Michigan, which was once one of the leading automobile construction sites. Then, you know, it turned into the Flint water crisis.
I have 3 kids, 15, 12. It's very hard for the simple fact, like I say, you have to brush their teeth with bottled waters. You have to cook the food for them with bottled waters. You have to monitor the time that they have in the tub because they can't take baths.
I'm a Flintstone, born and raised in Flint. I live here, I work here, I play here, I love here, and I'm not drinking my water.
I still need a job.
That's right.
We have to believe in what they're selling. Well, we don't need more police. We need more jobs. We need more infrastructure.
I mean, it happened like maybe over 6 years ago, and mentally they're undeveloped. my whole family, my children, my son, my nephew. A lot of the children have behavior problems, attention span is short.
You can look up this street right here. This street been infected. So you telling me you only gonna replace a water pipe in front of this house on the corner, then go 4 blocks down the street and replace just a little pipe and saying, okay, y'all, this whole street is straight. It's cool. Like that's false. And you can look at that's what I'm saying, you can look at the street. Ain't no construction going on up that street. It's hundreds of blocks going that way that's showing the same thing.
We are trying to be innovative, creative in our own community, take back our community, and give people the knowledge about government so we can be able to take on, those jobs ourselves.
We still don't have clean, drinkable water. We still don't drink water out of the faucet. My organization, the Sister Tour, along with LaToya Ruby Frazier and Moses West, we just brought a atmospheric water generator to Flint, Northside. We met Moses in Puerto Rico doing some relief work. And we said, can we get your machine to Flint? He said, let's make it happen. Tomorrow people will be able to pull up to our location and just pick up water. This is really for the people. It's not for any accolades or anything like that. It's just for the people.
If you can't fix Flint, where else can you fix? We are the city that put the world on wheels. We're America. We are the heart of America. I always ask people, like, why not here?
I wanted to show that because that example is so packed with the issues that we're facing right now in America. And as we know of Flint, there are hundreds of cities across this country that are dealing with the same exact thing, including my hometown of Selma, Alabama, and particularly in states in the Deep South where we have not dealt with some of the infrastructure needs. So as I get ready to really start my talk, what I want to do is I want to ask you all to participate, because I did grow up in the Baptist church, and when you're in a Southern Baptist church, you need some audience participation. Amen? Amen. So what I would like for you all to do is I want you to square yourselves in your seats. Clear your mind. Make sure you're kind of grounded. And I want you to close your eyes. And I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to imagine what America would look like without racism. Now open your eyes. I'm going to ask a question. How many of you all could see something? Exactly. I think I saw maybe 2 hands in a packed room. And the reason why that is important is if we can't even envision an America without racism, how will we eliminate it? So as we're talking about health disparities, and we know that fundamentally a root of health disparities in this country is rooted in racism, yet we cannot even envision a country without racism. And so it's really important that we really think about the core of the problem, have an honest conversation about that, what that is, really push ourselves to vision greater and to move forward. And so what I want to do is I want to just take us for a quick moment, kind of on this journey of some thoughts around this question. Where do we go from here? So let's start, in order to really think about where we go from here, we have to really talk about where we've been and where we're coming from. So we know that we live in the United States of America, and we know that even as we stand here, and I was happy to see my indigenous brother come and give homage to what's happening in that community and the natives that were on this land that literally were impacted by genocide, right? And also a disease warfare that if you know the story, you know that there were blankets that actually had diseases in the blankets that were given to indigenous people, right? So to eliminate them off the land. And so there's a long history of how health and the access to health and disease has been weaponized to impact communities, or particular communities of color. And I'm raising this in a context because if we're going to talk about truth to power, then we've got to lean into speaking about truth to power. But it starts with us being honest about the truth of the really foundation of this country. And then I can take us forward when we think about from where I'm from, which is in the Black Belt in Alabama. There's a city called Tuskegee, which actually my parents met at Tuskegee Institute. And some of you all may know of the Tuskegee experiments, right, where there were scores of men who were thinking that they were getting treatment, that were denied treatment, so they could basically be living guinea pigs around syphilis. And so that happened in this country. And then we can talk about gynecology. Let's talk about the field of gynecology when it was enslaved women, young women, who without anesthesia, that their bodies were actually used as an example, right, that they use them as guinea pigs to this field, and then we call this father of gynecology, who operated on women without any anesthesia. And then I can go on and on and on, but I didn't come just to talk about the problems. I came to talk about and get some context. And part of me giving the context is I want to say that what I think, and I think I use those examples in particular because those two examples talk about what I think are America's core problem when we're talking about minority health and healthcare in this country. There are two things. The first is racism. That fundamentally structural racism has impacted and shaped every single system in this country, in this nation. The second thing is something that we all are guilty of, and it is called this belief in American exceptionalism. And so what we don't want to say, or we don't want to take ownership of, is how we are in fact complicit to what is happening in communities. That every form of oppression has a belief that there's some person or some group of people that are better than others, right? And if I can go from racism, I can go from sexism, I can go from homophobia. Any form of oppression is a belief by some small group of people or some group of people that in fact that they are better or more deserving of another group of people. And while I can put those labels on it with sexism and homophobia and racism, we do that with healthcare. I've been engaged in conversations that people were actually happy and bragging that their healthcare was greater than someone else's healthcare, that they in fact had the best healthcare. And so even just the other day, as I was preparing for a talk at Princeton, someone walked up to me and said, we were talking about the political candidates, and he said, you know, part of my challenge with a couple of the candidates is that they want free things. They want to give free things to everybody. And now we're talking about this free health care. And I said, you know what? I guess you're right. They have some concern about it. Because God forbid that people could actually get well for free. Why would we want that? And part of it is there is something fundamentally that we've accepted as and absorbed as a value. That what makes me of value is when I can show that I have more than someone else. And it's easy for us to point at other folks and say that. And I know you all don't do that. But I'm raising that because if we're going to talk about truth, we've got to deal with the truth in us. And we've got to deal with the truth in us that makes us complicit in what has happened. And what is happening in America, we can talk about who is in the White House right now. We can talk about political parties. But fundamentally, when we, the people, make a decision that America is going to shift, America shall shift. When we make a decision that this country that health care is a human right, in fact, they will respond to it. What's really ironic, there's this particular moment, I know there's some people are feeling some sense of anxiety. I actually think this is a really good moment in time. That right now, one of the main issues that we're talking about in America is access to health care. Do you know how long we've been waiting on that? So what does that mean? That takes me to my next point, which is where we are right now. So there's some that feel like, oh my God, there's some that I know that says, oh my goodness. I had a friend the other day that said, I just don't know what we're gonna do. I don't know how we're gonna make it. And my 85-year-old aunt said, baby, we've seen worse. And just like we've risen in those moments, we'll rise now. And what I will say is, in moments of adversity, this is the moment for you to stand in a space of courage. This is the moment. And I am particularly excited about being invited here today because there's a room full of young people. You have a particular special moment. The first time since in the last 50 years, you are a generation that you have now eclipsed the baby boomers. There are more young people in this country right now than there are baby boomers. So in fact, the voting base is with you. So you will determine and shape how America is to go forward. But you have to also lean into your truth. And you've got to stand in that truth. And so I want to go back to you because, like I said, I'm a good Southern Baptist, and I like audience participation, and I want to pose a second question to you. You know the drill. Sit in your seat, get yourself squared, and close your eyes. My question to you is, what is your radical reimagining of America and our healthcare system? Open your eyes. How many of you could see something? Exactly. And let me tell you what the difference is in the first question and the difference in the second question. That part of what winds up happening, that one of the things that racism creates, it creates a culture of fear. And where you're in a space of fear, it's hard to see. It's hard to see anything. And so even when I pose the question around racism, it's hard, it's such a heavy issue, and it's so fundamentally a part of the fabric of this country, it's really hard to see beyond that, even though we've got to push ourselves. But the second question, it had space for hope. And so I believe the key of going forward is we've got to spend more time in the hope space. That oftentimes what we do is we're talking about the problem over and over again, how bad it is, what is the data, how much. You don't have to create another study to tell poor folks how bad healthcare is. You don't need any more data to convince Mrs. Smith about how her prescriptions have increased in price. You can go to the average American without any study, without any report, without any speech, and they know that fundamentally something is broken in this country as it relates to health care. There's something fundamentally broken. And so as we're talking about where we are, let's hang out to my third question. Where are we going? What is our radical imagination taking us forward? And how is this in the intersection of voting? And what can be done? Let me say that I stand here as an example of what can happen when someone leans into their possibilities. I am a black Southern woman from Alabama that my great-great-great-grandmother was sold and bought and sold by my great-great-great-great-uncle, less than 20 minutes from the place where I grew up. My presence in this country and my family's presence in this country was, we were considered chattel. We were considered less than humans, yet here I stand. I defy what those who didn't have a vision couldn't see. But I am the expression of those that had a vision that could see me here. And so I raise that to say that this is the moment that we can create. How are we in the wealthiest country in the world? I want you to sit with that. We're in the wealthiest country in the world, and we can't figure out how to provide health care to every single human being in this country. Here we sit, America, a place where immigrants were freely invited. Yet right now there are children, because they've got a different color passport or they speak a different language, that they are literally subjected to be in cages as if they are animals. Yet we sit and act like this is just a political conversation. This is more than a political conversation. This isn't about the Democrats. This is not about the Republicans. This isn't about Trump. This isn't about who the next Democratic nominee is. This is fundamentally about us and what our mark will be on America. And so I raised this. I could have come and talked and had all kinds of stats around what what are the health disparities and outcomes. The truth of the matter is, you know it. The truth is, you know it. And sometimes we talk about those things that keep from talking about the things that we need to talk about. And the things that we've got to talk about is, in order for us to reimagine and create a new America, we're going to have to lean into some difficult conversations. We've got unfinished business. We've got unfinished business as it relates to racism in this country. We have unfinished business as it comes to classism in this country. That how is it that the elected officials, that our U.S. senators and representatives have the best health care, yet they are, when you look at their numbers, they represent the wealthiest of America? There's something fundamentally wrong. And it's okay for us, we think, to point the finger, when in fact, part of the challenge is a question that I have for you. What is being called of you in this moment? No, it's not good enough to just retweet some cool report. It's not good enough just to say, I'm going to go and vote, even though you better vote. But there has to be a fundamental shift how we show up and what we demand of ourselves and our government. And in order to do that, I think voting is one way, is one intersection, and intervene in that. And so an example of that, how I and my co-founder, Cliff Albright, created Black Voters Matter. We didn't have a lot of resources. No one told us, gave us a grant, and we were like, okay, we're going to start it. What we had is something that I think can't be stopped. We had the will. We had the will to want something different. And I'm saying this is that you all can sit into every single workshop and read every little piece. You have got to shift something fundamentally inside you. Has to be non-yielding, that you believe that you can be an agent of transformative change in this country. That is how it will happen. It will not happen with us just saying political pundits. It will only happen when we lean into our humanity, to recognize that every single human being has value, to recognize that we need mental health in this country, that we need health care in this country, that we need people who are literally caring about the bodies of folks and the minds and the spirits. What we've done is we've created health care as another just business track. And so now sickness is profitable. And what does it mean when sickness is profitable? What that means is there are some people that are going to medical school that don't believe in healing. Y'all didn't hear me. Well, y'all said truth to power, so I'm here. Here I am. fundamentally saw that as a career path and a path of prestige, but fundamentally do not believe in the power of healing. Something's wrong with that. There are folks going to law school that don't believe in justice. There's something fundamentally wrong with that. There are folks that are teachers that don't like children. That one baffles me. That one baffles me, right? And that's because we're in a context that we're shaped to create a successful life, but not a truthful life. And so when we're talking about truth to power, that doesn't mean that I've got to get on the microphone or the megaphone and I'm just going to tell you my belief. That means, how does it live in you? Are you living a truthful life? Are you living a life that you actually believe that fundamentally other people deserve the kind of quality life that you want for you and your kids? Because I'll give one example. If you are okay with what is happening at the border right now, I don't understand that. Why don't I understand that? Because I don't know how many of you all are parents out here or have children. I don't know about you, but if I was in a desperate situation with my child and I had to get them safety, or I had to, for us to survive, I would walk to hell and back for my child. Would you not? So if that is the case, why do we not provide some grace and space for those that are seeking? Now, I know that doesn't seem like a healthcare issue. It is precisely a health issue. And it fundamentally goes back to the core of our being. And who are we being in this moment? And that fundamentally, if we allow this conversation to be held hostage within the context of a Democratic or Republican debate, we have failed. This is a conversation that we've got to own and to move forward and to bring into being, and not let healthcare just be a transaction around policy, but we literally have to think of this as transformative. And what does that mean? That means, young folk, those of you that are students, you've got to be different. You've got to be pioneers. You've got to demand not just that I'm going to get this learning, but that you're going to take it to the next level. That literally, fundamentally underneath that, I always ask the question with anything I do, where is the love in it? Because let me tell you this, power without love is cruelty. And so everything that we're doing, part of what we're seeing is when we're walking past people and just say it's their problem. We are fundamentally not being our best selves either. I'm going to share a story, a quick story, as I get ready to wrap up, of an incident that I had probably around 8 years ago. So about 8 years ago, you all would appreciate this. It was the beginning of the year, and it was one of my New Year's resolutions, and yes, I am one of them. And I had this New Year's resolution. I decided that by the summer, I was going to be fine. And in order for me to be fine and fit by the summer, I needed to lose 30 pounds. And I was going to do that by going on this diet. It was one of those diets. I saw South Beach something, I don't know, something that I thought I was going to die on if I kept on for over 30 days. But I decided to do this diet. And so with this diet that I was doing, I had one cheat day. So I had one day that I could get whatever I wanted, and usually it was a Saturday. So at the time, I don't know if anybody here is from Atlanta, but there was a place called Gladys Knight Chicken and Waffles. Y'all know something about that? Okay. It is the best fried chicken in the world. And I can almost guarantee you that one chicken wing is at least 5,000 calories. I am clear. It's just too good. So I go to Gladys Knight Chicken and Waffles. I go inside. As I'm getting ready and I'm getting ready to go inside, there's a homeless man that was sitting right side on the stoop right next to the restaurant. And as I'm going in, he had some food. He was eating his food, and I spoke to him. We kind of exchanged. And then I went inside. So I went inside, I ate my food. And you know if anybody has done a diet, you know, and you got like this special food or there's certain food that you want, you know how you eat it, but it's so good, you got to save some of it for later. And you plan to hide it when you go home and put it in the back of the refrigerator so nobody will eat it. And so I decided I was going to save a portion of my food, right? And for later, it was going to be my treat. So I saved my food, and I'm walking out. And so as I'm walking out, just as I feared, my friend sitting there, he said, "Hey, ma'am, can I have that food?" Now, that might not have been of course, I could have just said no, but one, I was born and raised in a household that if anybody ever asked me for food, I am, by my faith in who I am obliged to support that, right? And so here I'm at this moment of my moral crisis and my chicken wings. I was like, oh, so I've got to give him my food. So I got the food, and I was giving it to him, and I said, "Here, you eat better than me." And he turned around to me and he says, "What do you think, I should?" And it messed me up. Here I am, Miss Social Justice Organizer, power to people. And this homeless man had called me on my stuff. And I couldn't shake it off that night and that evening. And what he was saying was, and it was true, that loaded in my comment to him, I said, "You probably eat better than me." And loaded underneath that was this belief that because I worked all day and because I worked hard for these chicken wings and that I was on a diet, that somehow I was more deserving of this food than he was. And it was actually informed, even though I didn't think about it at the time, by the fact that I'd seen him eating earlier. So I'm like, "Well, you already had your Gladys Knight chicken and waffles." But in that moment, I'm raising that in that moment, what was revealed of me was that where my own American exceptionalism lives. Where does yours? Where does it live in you that you make a judgment on the needs of others based on you worked hard? You did all the right things. You deserve something. And so part of what has been holding the healthcare debate hostage in this country is really rooted in that same belief, y'all. It's really around political will. You know, we're making this conversation be about this healthcare debate right now that in the Democratic Party. We're making this debate be around, well, who's going to pay for it? You know, I've not had too many conversations where people were really upset trying to figure out how we were going to pay for those missiles. I've just not had those conversations. I haven't. I've never been in a conversation like, I just don't know how we're going to pay for these missiles. We don't need to do that. But for some reason, there's all this anxiety about how are we going to pay for health care. Like we figure out how to pay for everything else. And so it's a false argument. I'm raising it because we're not leaning into truth. I'm not, being a policy person, I'm not saying that it's not a real consideration. My concern, what I'm saying is, in the wealthiest country in the world, we can figure that one out. And so as I get ready to kind of close out, I want to pull back up that question. Where do we go from here? So as you sit there with your radical reimagining of what America can be, how does that look like in public policy? How does that look like how you show up? How does that look like in this election cycle? And so there's a couple of things just quickly, I'm just going to take speaker's privilege, a couple of things I want to bring up about even this election cycle. You know, I've had all kind of conversations around this election cycle where people are saying, and I'm not raising this in any way around partisanship, I'm raising it in the context of just thought, just something for you to think about. That ultimately, I've had all kind of conversations where I hear people say, oh, this election cycle is a mess. We just don't have a candidate, such and such and such. And I'm thinking to myself, out of the Democratic Party list of candidates, this has been the most diverse field we've ever had in my entire life. We've had women. We've had members of the LGBTQ community. We've got conservatives. We've got moderates. We've got liberals. We've got women. Yes, I said women. So why are we feeling this anxiety? Because on some level, we have all been socialized and trained by the political parties, both of them, to tell us who is going to save us all. And when it's not clear of the candidate that they want us to have, it means we've got to make a choice. And instead of seeing choice as a blessing, we see it as a burden. In the greatest democracy in America? And that's because fundamentally some of the things that we've been socialized to do, it's not democracy, it's followership. We're going to speak truth to power. And I'm raising that because fundamentally that's not the conversation we're having. We're having a conversation around candidates, which I think is part of the problem. Part of the problem is we've allowed American democracy to become so candidate-centered that it's about who is going to be the next savior of America. And when we don't see a candidate that has all of the check marks, then fundamentally something is wrong. When in fact, the last that I checked, it didn't say we the candidate, it didn't say we the political parties, it said we the people. And so we've abdicated our responsibility to stand in a space of power that if democracy is to live and to be shaped and to be better, it will not be because of a candidate, it will be because of us. Where else in America that you just show up and you tell the people that's getting ready to hire you what you gonna do? Where do they do that? Dean? Is that what happened here? I'm quite sure they had some job description and some criteria that they were judging you about that they had formulated. So let's flip this thing around and right size what democracy is supposed to be. That we are supposed to be creating candidates and supporting candidates that represent our issues. I don't need a best friend and a candidate. I've got those. I need a leader. But I also just don't think that one person, and we can't possibly believe that one person is going to change and turn this whole ship around. It is going to take us collectively doing that work. And so as I get ready to wrap up, a couple of things I just want to lead thoughts. First question to you. What is being called of you in this moment? Second question. Where does the love live in it? Third question. How will your work be a demonstration of that love for humanity? And fourth, where does American exceptionalism live in you? That is a barrier that shapes your beliefs of how we go forward. I think if we're starting with those fundamental questions with ourselves, that it can give us not only some grace and space for who we are, but grace and space for others. And ultimately, you all, I raise this because I want the conversation to evolve. We've got to get out of this. We've got to get out of this framework of like we're playing football, like your team blue and my team red. We got to get out of this. We're all suffering. I want my community to be healthy. I want all communities to be healthy. I want all children to be healthy and whole and happy. That's what my vision is. And I'm willing to fight for that vision. And I do the work for that. That's what has to happen. It doesn't make, I don't have to feel that I have to have something just to make me feel better than you. But y'all know that lives in us. That somehow when you see your insurance policy and the other person has an insurance policy and they got one less thing than you got, you like, oh yeah, mine is good. Because fundamentally there's something in the foundation of what we've accepted around American exceptionalism that says as long as I can point in some way that I am better than you, then that fulfills me as being successful. We've got to shift that or we will suffer together. We are now looking at an eve where we're on a virus. That the last that I checked, I don't think there's a race criteria or gender criteria or even a class criteria. We're all vulnerable. And so ultimately, can we use our brilliant minds? I fundamentally believe there's enough people in this room right now that if we literally stood in our power and our truth, and that if you tapped into your brilliance and your spirit, I want to end as I started, that part of this is the will of the people, that it has to be something that lives in you, that is what gives us life, that believes in something different, that stands in something different. That is what transforms. You know that. You know what love feels like. And you know what the absence of love feels like. And so we've got this unique opportunity. Young people, you are shaping where we're going forward. You will shape the political context of America. This is a moment. This moment that we're in right now is not by accident, and it's not because Trump is in office. We like boogeymen. We like to say, oh, it's all his fault. So, okay, let's say Trump loses. And what? We back to wonderful America? We are not being honest that fundamentally there are structural problems in this country that we've got to deal with. But the hope is, and the good news is that we can. That there's enough of us that we can shift it. There's enough of us, but there's a couple of things you've got to do. One, you've got to believe it. You have to have hope when nobody else has it. You've got to demand a different kind of healthcare system. You've got to be innovative and creative, students, not just respond. I raised the Democratic nomination process and the frustration. That is a prime example of when you advocate your power and now you're so used to responding that when you don't have something clear to respond to, it feels like a burden. The actual fact that you got a choice feels like a burden. Think about that. Because we would rather for somebody just to tell us all who to vote for. If we're being honest. We would just rather just tell us which one to vote for. Just tell us which one. But the fact that there are choices feels like a burden. Because we've abdicated our leadership and our role and responsibility in securing democracy. We just want to show up and vote every once in a while. When fundamentally, the strength of democracy will not be determined by who's in office. It's determined by us because we make the decision of who's in office. And so, if you don't remember anything else that I've said today, just know that when we work together, we win. When we work together, we win. Women, when we work together, we win. The disabled community, when we work together, we win. I'm raising every single major policy shift that's happened in this country that's moved forward is because there was a committed few people who had a vision that when they closed their eyes, when others couldn't see, they saw something. And they kept looking until they could. So I hope that you sit with the question of what racism, what America can look like without racism. Because in order for us to create that kind of America, we've got to first see it. And so the Baptist preacher is coming out of me around when I say, when we work together, I want you to say we win. When we work together, we win. When we work together, we win. Okay, I'm glad y'all had a good, I'm gonna need some folks to act like they went to the Pentecostal church in here. Y'all are acting like my Methodist church. Nothing with Methodist, because I grew up. But I know I would go to church with my Pentecostal cousins. I was like, oh, this is fun. So I'm going to ask you, I want you to sit it. I want you to think about it. I want you to feel it. I want you to take the next couple of days at this conference and absorb the information. Get the data, get the information right, but also bring your spirit and your truth to that space. And as you go out, be armed with that. And armed with a belief system that says, in fact, we don't have to accept this, that we can change this data point, that we can change this outcome, but ultimately, we've got to stand in our own power, in our own spirit, and we've got to believe and we've got to demand. And so you've got to believe that when we work together, we win. You've got to believe it. There's evidence. I got the receipts. I'm a receipt. That there were folks that when they work together, y'all, we win. And the win sometimes looks different because we're in protracted struggle. So sometimes the win isn't just a policy. It might be changing the behavior or changing the values or literally shifting. So you've got to expand how you see win. But I'm telling you, whenever we work together, we win. When we work together, we win. When we work together, we win. When we work together, we win. Thank you.
Welcome back to the webcast of the 22nd Annual William T. Small Jr. Keynote Lecture from the 41st Annual Minority Health Conference. Ms. Latasha Brown is right here in the studio, and she's available to respond to your questions and comments. We encourage you to send us your questions via email at question.unc.edu, via Twitter using the hashtag MHCQA, or by commenting on the Q&A post on our Facebook page at facebook.com/UNC Minority Health and Instagram at Instagram.com/UNC. Ms. Brown, thank you so much for speaking with us today and sharing your expertise. And we're going to go ahead and jump into our first question.
Okay.
So one of our audience members wrote in and said, I'm only 21 and already feel burned out by being a student activist. How do I keep on going without developing a toxic relationship with activism?
You know, that's such a wonderful question, and I'm glad to have that question. I remember myself in my early 20s, I just started doing a lot of activist work, and I was so passionate, you know, in my mind, and my belief was, in 5 years, I was going to do all the work, and then I was going to change the world ultimately. And so, you know, I think you have to be realistic as that part of what we're trying to do when we're making transformative change is that it's an arc of time. It takes an arc over time that literally you've got to sustain, you've got to be in it for the long haul, that we are in protracted struggle. And what does that mean? That sometimes it's not like, well, let me just burn myself very quickly, but you've got to really be able to make sure that you're sustained because you are part of the work. And so to that person, I would say a couple of things. One, I think it's really important to make yourself take care of yourself, that you are ultimately responsible for taking care of your own health, and making sure that you're building in time for reflection and for rejuvenation, and that you're feeding yourself and you're feeding your mind, body, and spirit, that you surround yourself, have fun, you know, use music. You have to have an outlet because this work is very traumatic. It can be very taxing and traumatic on us and our bodies. And make sure that you eat and drink a lot of water. I have activist friends that'll call me and say, please drink water. And so I think that that's one piece. The second part of it too is I think really recognizing that as an activist, that people in the community actually see you as an example of the work. And so it's really important that they see examples of folks who are able to do this work being healthy and whole and even have joy. And so you have to recognize that it doesn't serve not only you, but it doesn't really serve your community when you're just burned out. That is really important for you to recognize that for many people, your leadership and your voice and how you show up in this space is also the very thing that can motivate and inspire others. And we need you. So we need you to take care of yourself. You know, and the third thing that I would say is find you a community that will support you. That you need a group of friends, you need a political home, you need an organization, but you can't do this work by yourself. And you shouldn't do this work by yourself. And it's not even expected that you would do this work by yourself, but we all need each other. That's the beauty of human relationships. So I would say surround yourself with those that bring you joy and bring you love, and center this, that this is hard, long-term work. That part of what keeps me moving and keeps me from getting burned out is joy. And I use those things that I love, like I sing, I like good food, and I like being in fellowship with others that think in alignment with myself.
Yeah, so that kind of touched on a lot of the things you talked about with, you know, taking care of yourself first. And actually our next question kind of builds off that. And we had another member from our audience say, how would you build courage and fight fear in working against racism in both yourself and communities? So that takes care of the self.
That's an excellent point. You know, what's interesting is we think that what defines courage is not being strong in the absence of fear. Courage is actually courage is really defined around how you're leaning into something that you're afraid of, you feel fear, and in spite of it, you're tapping into your own power. And so I think what is really important is when we're thinking about what requires courage, courage doesn't mean I'm not scared. What courage means is that I'm going to move towards those things that are right or I'm passionate about in spite of that fear. And I think part of being able to do that is to be able to name it. I say name it and claim it. Be able to recognize that I'm uncomfortable, right? Or I'm feeling fearful, or I don't know if we're going to win this campaign or not. And you've got to really build yourself up. And I often tell people that I do think that while we're in this kind of political battle, this is really a spiritual battle. And what I mean by that is that our spirits, that who we are, that part of this process is important for us to tap into that, because I think that's our greatest power, and really be able to lean into a particular kind of way that as we're doing this work and we know that we're fearful, that we're actually leaning in a way that we're tapping into something greater that says this is part of my mission, this is part of my calling, and it's really important that I do this work. And so I just encourage people that as they're doing this work, that part of demonstrating courage is you got to practice it. You got to keep doing the work. You got to keep speaking truth to power. You got to keep showing up in spaces that may make you feel uncomfortable, and you've got to lean into it. And part of combating fear is being that example of courage. You know, when I'm around other courageous people, for some reason, I feel a little bit more courageous. And people will feel that way about you. So when you are part of your way of even combating fear is to demonstrate courage. It has this symbiotic relationship of both of those elements. And so that's how I would offer that. People just lean into it. Bring your best, bring your greatest, and stand in truth. It is amazing how liberating truth is and can be.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, because even if you don't get it right the first time, the fact that you tried and that you're continuing to try just says a lot.
Absolutely, and even beyond, like it's trying, but it's actually in practice.
Right.
That part of, I think, what courage is, it's an evolving practice. You know, it's like when you're taking a shot for the first time, when you're taking when you're basketball, you're playing basketball, you're taking a shot the first time, it can be really scary. But you recognize that the more you do it, the more comfortable you are, the more confidence you feel. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that even in a game you won't feel some fear every once in a while.
Sure.
Or continue to feel that, but your confidence, right, around the practice of it. And so I think part of what actually helps strengthen and builds up courage is to lean into conflict. It's to literally lean into those things of fear, be able to recognize it and lean into it in a way with your truth and with your inner power, which I think is your spirit.
Right. That's a great answer. So we have another question from one of our audience members, and they said, how should we, as public health researchers and practitioners, move beyond data and theory to be a part of this moment and movement?
I think that's an excellent question. You know, people who are working in the field, you are our experts. They are our experts day in and day out. You know, I think that there's a lot of power in story. And I know oftentimes when I'm hearing people, particularly who are medical professionals, who talk about the story, they talk about the issue and not just the problem, but they talk about the problem. They give an example of a story around it, and they talk about how it can be addressed. It has this amazing impact on me. And so I think part of those that are really working in this space to really be able to give voice to the issue, right? To help people better understand, because sometimes these issues are very nuanced and we'll get caught up in the data, we'll give the data and the information and people just kind of zone out.
Right.
But really, if people are able to really connect to the stories and the power of the stories and really be able, not just in the space of what the problem is, but what is the solution.
Right.
And so they that are working in this space and doing this work, many of them have been very innovative and on the cutting edge of how we should address, and we need to hear from them. But we need to hear from them in a way that helps us connect ourselves in it, to help us really be able to see ourselves in this work. So I think a couple of things they can do. One, be on the forefront of really being our experts in the community, to educate people on really what's happening. Two, really be able to come and share stories of what has happened and how things have been resolved or what issues need to be addressed.
Sure.
And then the third thing is, I think that there's a possibility of their voice and their expertise and their speaking truth to power that can actually empower the rest of us to
Right.
really be able to lean into those same issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. So then we have another question from one of our audience members saying, what are actionable ways to enact change in places where we don't? For example, like what you talked about in your speech, like the border.
So I think there's a couple of things that we can do. I think one, we think of that there's ways that people show up. You know, we have a voice. You know, I want people to really recognize that we all have a voice.
Right.
And there are many ways that we can engage. Everybody's not going to be in the front line protesting, right? Everybody's not going to get in their car and jump and go to the front lines, but they can have impact. Because if we know what is happening on the border right now with immigrant children, how they're being separated from their families and how children and families are being put in cages, that you would know that Congress has an enormous amount of power over that. Our U.S. senators. So there's a couple of things they can do. They can call their representative, find out where your representative is on that issue, whether it's your congressperson, whether it's your representative, and write them, put pressure, call
Right.
their office and say, this is not acceptable, right? And I think, one, we need that political pressure. A second thing that you can do is there are organizations that are making themselves available. I think Doctors Without Borders, there are others. Right. There are organizations like ACLU that are actually fighting the legal part of the battle. There are other organizations that are down there that are providing services. I think you can do a little research. You can really just do a Google search and find out what organizations are on the front lines and be able to write a check. If it's for $10 or $20 or a couple of $100, that when you're doing this work, and as someone who's done relief work, I know how important it is that that work is funded. So they can write a check. And then the third thing that I would say is those that are writers, those that really can use the power of writing, they should write op-eds. Write to your editors, write to your local newspaper. It's really important that that sometimes when the national media is not covering these stories, they kind of lose, the issue is not resolved,
Right.
it kind of lose its groundedness, right? We need people to continue to talk about this until this crisis is over.
Right. So that goes back to the Flint, Michigan video
Yes.
you showed us, and continuing the momentum, because even though it's not relevant in the media anymore, it's still a very prevalent issue that needs to be addressed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's still happening to people every day.
Yeah.
It's in their day-to-day lives, and we can make a difference. I just, I want people to know that it's really important, but you can make a difference. And there's different ways you can be involved in it. Volunteer. Find an organization that you can volunteer and get involved in. I think that every single person needs some kind of political home.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have another question, one of our audience members. Do you have any advice about reconciling your privilege, such as gender, ability, and race as a change maker?
Absolutely. I think that part of when we're talking about what privilege affords, it affords access.
Okay.
Right, and it affords access in some interesting ways. And I think that part of what needs to happen is that we need to talk to our communities. Like my grandfather would always say, "Ho where you are," right? And I think it's really important that we need people who have privilege to use that privilege to leverage the space so that the issue gets talked about. So that to leverage the space so that in communities those things are not normally being talked about or being challenged, that they speak truth to power.
Right.
Like that's why I love the theme of this conference, that we've got to have people, we need more people who are speaking truth to power, but outside of the context of the political parties. Like we don't need this conversation just to be said, well, if you're left or right or you're Republican or Democrat.
Sure.
At the end of the day, this is really a matter of humanity of being right or wrong.
Right.
And really being able to use that privilege to really be able to provide a platform to discuss those issues, to also be able to use that privilege to open the space to allow other people that don't have access, right, to help facilitate that and navigate that space. It is a saying, there's a Bible saying that to much whom is given, much is required. And I think we should think along those lines, that if you have been given much, that much is required of you. And to lean into that and to see that actually as a blessing, to actually see that as an opportunity, not just to be transactional, but to really be transformative.
Right, and building off of that, I have a follow-up question. So that's if you recognize your privilege, right? You can address issues that causing inequities and disparities. What do you have to say for people that are trying to engage people who don't recognize their privilege? How should we go about that as public health professionals and just people living within our communities?
I think there is a lot of power in just telling the truth.
Yeah.
And I think part of what happens is that we're not honest and we're not truthful with each other. We're politically correct in some ways. We don't want to be offensive.
Yeah.
We don't want to deal with the hard and the difficult issues. It is hard for me to believe that in this year, in 2020, in America, that if I ask the question of does racism exist, regardless of whether people are on the spectrum, there's some reality that the truth is that we know that it exists.
Right.
And so those conversations we can no longer run from. We have to lean into them. And so I think part of what has to happen, even in the space of privilege, is that we've got to take this opportunity to have difficult conversations that we've not had. We've got to have conversations around structural racism and how it has impacted and shaped the American political landscape, but particularly this issue where we're talking about healthcare and healthcare access. We have got to deal with the growing inequities of resources. Why is it that you've got the top 1% that are controlling an enormous amount of wealth in this country, right? We really got to have that honest conversation around as we're moving forward. I think the other thing is, I think we've also got to be honest with ourselves how we're complicit. And I talked a little bit about that in my talk. But it's easy for us to point fingers and say what those folks won't do or what that party won't do, but not really have a real self-assessment of where we are and where we're complicit in our bias against other folks that are different or we perceive as different than ourselves. And I think it's really important for us to really lean into, our own belief of what are our biases, what are our prejudices, right? And really do the work to get over that and really literally envision, spend some time imagining. I talk about this radical reimagination. I think that as we're going forward, this is an amazing opportunity for us to really radically reimagine a new America, an America that we can and we will provide quality health care to every single citizen in this country. Every single person in this country deserves to have a healthy, free life.
Right. And that kind of builds off of, when you were talking about how are we going to come up with a solution, how we're going to fathom this. And I thought it was really profound the way that you said we've been through worse.
We've been through worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we have to see that with each challenge, there's an opportunity. You know, I always say, what is this moment teaching me?
Yeah.
When I run up against a wall, you know,
Yeah.
I said, well, what is my lesson?
Yeah.
Right, I need to figure out what my lesson is. What is this moment teaching us? And I think that what we're seeing right now, we're saying it as if, you know, I hear people talk about kind of the politics in this country as being very divisive,
Divided.
right? You know, but part of that is an outgrowth of we've allowed ourselves to go into our own corners, right? We've actually, in terms of the way we communicate, you know, I love social media, I love Twitter, you know, but even social media, we have used that as a vehicle to create our own little communities, and we're not really interacting with each other. And so I think we've got to get back to some basics that are really rooted in people talking to each other, having honest conversations, creating what I call grace and space for us to lean into difficult conversations and be able to really listen and to hear from each other, and also to really to be able to push our minds to really be innovative and creative about the solutions as we're going forward. Instead of our conversations being hijacked in this space of just responding to what is or someone else's idea, why can't we think about like the founders of a new America and really think about what is possible and really hang out in the possibilities of what it really could mean and would mean, that as we're sitting here in the wealthiest country in the world, that we have the ability to be able to provide health care to every single human being in this country, that it is a possibility. What we need now is we've got to have the will.
Right. That's a very good perspective on the whole healthcare scenario. So we have another question from Michael from the Virginia Department of Health, and he asked via email, how can we use a strengths-based approach to foster political involvement in communities that have been historically disenfranchised and are not used to harnessing their voice and their power?
You know, part of, that's an excellent question. Thank you, Michael. That's an excellent question. You know, that is part of our work. Black Voters Matter Fund, which is an organization that I co-founded, we actually created that organization based on that, on the idea that part of marginalized communities that were actually kind of disengaged, many of them were disengaged or disillusioned by the process, that part of the framing, the narrative is that those communities are apathetic. We never use that. We take that out. That word, we don't even use that word. We don't believe that folks are apathetic. We don't think that people don't care. We think that people are frustrated with the process, or they think that the process does not work, right? Or they've experienced it where it hasn't worked. We've got to be honest. As much as I do voter work, there are times that I voted that I really didn't, I was in a quagmire. I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't like either of these candidates, right? And so that's real for people. So part of our work, the way we do, particularly from a strength approach, is that we shift the focus. That part of how we've done politics in America is that we've allowed the conversation to be dominated by either the political parties or the candidates. We do very differently. We are centering the conversation in people. And so when we go to communities that are marginalized, we don't start with the context of, you gotta vote. If you don't vote, you know, you don't have a voice. We never use that kind of framework. What we say is, what is it that you envision for your community? What are some of the challenges of your community? I think what is really important is to really have a strategy that you get people to first connect to feeling their own sense of power and their own sense of agency, and seeing not that the vote is more powerful than them, because oftentimes we hear people say, you know, if you don't vote, you don't count. That is, why would you say that? That people count because they're people, because they're human beings. Them voting is just them demonstrating their agency to really have some control over those decisions that are made over them. And so I think that it's really important that we shift the conversation, that as we're talking to people in these communities, that we shift the conversations that is really about them, and that we can shift the conversation that is shaped by the issues and not so caught up in being candidate-centered and personality-centered or party-centered. And we've seen where that's worked. We've seen in communities that we've gone in that the vote turnout was low, and when we shifted the conversation and we shifted the focus, the focal of power, right, there was a difference. They responded differently because when people feel a sense of their own power, when people feel listened to, when people actually feel like someone is being honest to them, they respond very differently. And so that's how we've used in terms of our strategy, really listening and being honest and helping to remind people that they have agency and that they can use that voting is one way for them to demonstrate and use their agency to transform their community.
Oh, that's great. It's interesting to see how sometimes something so complex can go back to something so simple. Just
Yes.
treat people like people.
Absolutely. It works, doesn't it?
Yeah. So we have another question building off that from Caroline in California, who asked via email, how can I make an impact and speak my truth without feeling defeated by the people in power? So that's a really great question.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Thank you, Caroline. You're all the way in California. Thank you for your question. You know, I think part of what's really important is that we have to recognize that sometimes speaking truth is not comfortable. And when we're speaking truth in power and putting that in power, and we're challenging kind of the status quo, it is certainly not comfortable. It's really a difficult question, and it's a difficult process. And why I go back to the beginning and say we've got to lean into it. That part of what has to happen is we also have to build the muscle up to recognize that power concedes nothing without a demand. And so as we are shifting and as we are challenging power, that there's going to be some resistance. We've got to factor in that there will be some resistance.
Right.
And so how do we show up in those spaces? We have to show up in our most authentic, powerful self, recognizing that there may be a space that we're still feeling that sense of fear or those butterflies in our stomach. But what we know is that we're on the right side of history. That what is fueling you is that, in fact, what I am speaking to is a humanity, right? And people, and maybe you might be fighting me now, but I've got to believe that what I am saying, right, has some level of truth and power that possibly it can pierce your heart. Possibly you'll be able to hear me. And so you've got to move by your own conviction and not necessarily the acceptance of those that are in power. Because if you're driven by that, you'll always be constantly kind of responding. And it is hard. It is hard and difficult, and I don't want to, and tiring, and I don't want to minimize that, right? But what I will say is those that, I don't know a single person who has made remarkable change. I can go from Mother Teresa, I can go to Dr. Martin Luther King, I can go to Nelson Mandela, that did not come under extreme negative press, negative pressure, that there are people that actually tried to kill them. There are people that killed them, right? That Dr. King was assassinated. And so part of the burden of a true speaker is that there is a pushback and there will be resistance, right? But part of the beauty of a true speaker is that your spirit is liberated to stand even in the space of fear, to speak that truth to power and surround yourself with folks. And so I would say that I think that's why it's really important that you're building yourself up, like spiritually, emotionally, that you're taking care of yourself, that you are sleeping and drinking water and having fun and centering in joy, because it is hard work.
Yeah. So we have another question. What are the most common barriers you've confronted while speaking your truth and how you overcome them? So it's kind of building off what you just talked about, but on a more personal level.
Yeah, you know, I think part of, it's really interesting. A couple of years ago, and this actually happened to me 2 years ago. 2 years ago, we were doing a voter outreach trip through Florida, and we got one of the days, my co-partner and I, who started the organization, we were getting ready to go speak at churches, and someone came to me and said, you can't go to this church because they're not going to let you speak because you're a woman. And I was like, oh.
Taken aback.
I was really taken back. I'm like, wait a minute, we're in 2019, and I can go to a place of faith, right, of the faith that which I practice and speak because I am a woman. And so part of what happens in that process, I could have done two things. One, I could have allowed that to paralyze me, to be so upset and to feel so oppressed by that I allowed that to paralyze me, right? Or I could actually use that moment, not as a teaching moment for myself, but really how do I turn that pain into possibilities and transform? And so that one story, I've told that story to thousands of people, right? To thousands of people around the reason why we've got to deal with sexism. Even in that particular incident, I was able to talk to some of the folks around talking about some of the challenges of that moment. And I think part of what we've got to do is when we see those challenges, we've got to come up against them. And so part of speaking truth to power, I'll just say, it's not easy. Right? It gets easier as I build the muscle, but sometimes I am in places that I know what I said
Yeah.
you know, may ruffle a couple of feathers, right?
Yeah.
You know, I know that I'm in places that what I said is not the politically correct thing to do, right?
Sure.
But the thing that has been, if there's one thing that I can say, that the one thing that leaves me always feeling good after a talk is I always center my comments in love. Even when it's around corrective behavior, even when it's around something that I don't agree with, I always, in the back of my mind and from the place in which it comes from a place of love, because I also think love is corrective.
Right.
That, you know, that my family corrected me because they loved me, and I love humanity. So those things that I raise and I talk about and I protest about is because I love humanity, and I think better for them, and better for us. And so part of what has been for me has been the biggest relief of how I deal with difficult conversations and speak truth to power, is that I always know that I am going to come from the framework of love.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, even if I make a mistake, I will own my mistake, but I know that I'm always speaking from a place for me that's a place of love.
Oh, that's wonderful. And kind of building off that, I think a theme throughout your speech and throughout hearing you talk today in general, that you have a great quality of resilience. And I recently watched one of your videos, and you talked about color blindness. And so given the structural racism comments and everything about that, how does color blindness tie in with that for you?
You know, it's interesting. I would go to places, and this is a favorite phrase that I'll hear often, that I'll go to places and people say, well, you know, I'm not racist because I don't see color.
Yeah.
Right? And that's actually one of the most racist phrases I've ever heard, right? Because what you're saying is, you're saying that there's something so fundamentally troubling about color, or seeing some color, that I'm just gonna say that I don't see it. First of all, it's not truthful. Unless you're colorblind, really, right?
Yeah.
One, is not truthful. But secondly, what is it? There's something in you that makes you feel that you've got to ignore the being of someone else because they're different in order to say, I'm not racist, when in fact it's actually pointing to that you're not comfortable with race. And so I tell people, I always look at it from the perspective of how I love flowers.
Okay.
And why I love flowers. I love flowers because I love pink tulips.
Oh, okay.
And I love red roses. And I like the orange roses. And sometimes I want white roses. Or sometimes I want baby breaths. The bottom line is, part of the beauty and the joy of flowers is that they are different.
Right.
And so what makes a bouquet, right, is that they're different. We've got variety. And so part of what we've got to do, and when we're thinking about what it means to be colorblind, it means that I'm going to be ignorant, or I'm going to be untruthful, or I'm going to stay in my space of comfort, right? But imagine the world, what the goodness you have access to when you take the blinders off, and not only are you able to see the colors, but you're able to appreciate them and are honored that they are different and that each of them brings some level of beauty to the human process. And so I think that that's where we got to go. The idea isn't to make everybody be the same. I don't want everybody to be the same.
Right.
Matter of fact, I don't want everybody to be like me. I would drive myself crazy if the whole world was like me, right?
Right.
You know, I love the fact that my friends are distinctively different, and I
Yeah.
love that they have different personalities. And it's that beauty and that exchange that I embrace and lean into that allows me to even express my own humanity. And so when we're talking about, even in this phrase around colorblindness, like, why would you want to be colorblind? Why would you not want to see every single color in the rainbow? Why would you not want to see the beauty of humanity, right? Why would you not want to taste and experience and learn from those that have a distinctively different experience from you? And so I think that oftentimes people use that phrase, not really being thoughtful. They use it as a crutch, or they use it as a barrier to keep from dealing with their discomfort of racism.
That's a really great way to explain colorblindness, especially for those who are not familiar with hearing that. So we started off with you singing. Would you like to wrap up with another song?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest. Oh, we who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. Oh, we who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Thank you. And thank you for having me.
I'm like speechless now. Well, thank you again for taking the time to share with us your knowledge, your experience, expertise. It's been a very eye-opening experience and day. And we invite all of you to mark your calendars for February 26th, 1 year from today. We will bring you the 23rd annual William T. Small Jr. keynote lecture from the 42nd annual Minority Health Conference. And for more information about this and other minority health related events and organizations, please visit www.minority.unc.edu. To all of our viewers at the partner conferences, thank you so much for joining us and for your excellent questions and comments. And lastly, we'd like to offer a special thank you to the amazing team of students, faculty, staff who work tirelessly behind the scenes to make this webcast a success. Again, my name is Laura Dugum, and I thank you for being with us today. We look forward to seeing you in February 2021.
That was fun. Thank you.